Fermentation is the phenomenon that truly captured Joyce's imagination. It captured his duodenum, too. He was an ardent drinker of ardent spirits, particularly a Swiss white wine known as Fendant de Sion, that he affectionately called the Archduchess's urine. The influence of Guinness and Company and John and Jameson and Son in Irish history and in Finnegan's Wake is pervasive, and Joyce's set suggests that his polyglot manipulations of language are tantamount to the processes of brewing and distilling. In a passage where Shem, a self parody of Joyce, cooks eggs in his kitchen, fermented words refer to the language of Finnegan's Wake itself. Fermentation has a host of implications in the Wake, from Noah's drunkenness to breweries, alehouses, and famous Irish malt products like Guinness Stout. The fermentation of alcohol occurs when yeasts, unicellular fungi, in the genus Saccharomyces, break down sugars as in partially germinated barley to make malt that is used in brewing and distilling. Rot a peck of Paz malt. Joyce was captivated by the metaphoric potencies of fermentation, and he told his friend Frank Budgeon, fermented drink must have had a sexual origin. In a woman's mouth, probably. I have made Bloom eat Molly's chewed seed cake. This is a reference to the moment in Ulysses where Leopold Bloom recalls Molly's early infatuation, kissing him and passing a bolus of chewed seed cake from her mouth to his. Joyce takes the metaphor of fermented words to even greater extremes in the Wake. Shem uses his own feces to write all over his body, and the excremental self-creation of shit writing mockingly subverts the Victorian convention of the language of flowers, where the lowly mushrooms symbolize suspicion and lichens dejection or solitude. By comparison, Shem's alchemical operation of changing feces to indelible ink seems congruent with the inky deliquescence of Copernus Comatus, and the corrosive sublimation of his Swiftian endeavor recycles back again to fermented words. Flowering plants and trees of all kinds inhabit Finnegan's cosmos. The Wake's botany is rampant, but essential. Joyce bent the conventions of the language of flowers to his own ends, just as he appeared to draw on the Celtic mythology of trees. He, he pilfered from obscurities like S.A. Binyon's Philanthrography, a method of leaf and flower writing, 1909, and even adumbrated the historical grammar of poetic myth found in The White Goddess, 1948, by Robert Graves. Joyce's placement of mushrooms at the darker interstices of his night world accords with the tangential valuation awarded the fungi by non-mycologists and mycophobes. Mushrooms are hated, and therefore overlooked when they appear. The Wake's language of mushrooms is deeply rooted in his botanical vision, but like any slightly regarded ort in the Wake or toadstool twinkling in the margins, might suddenly occupy centrality of station, as in Book 1, Chapter 3, where we find our disreputable hero, Earwicker, implicated in a dubious and unspecified crime in the park. Those many warts, those slummy patches, half-insta wrinkles, what has come over the face of the whole broader E, and shrine of Mount Moose saves us. The large fungal park has grown. Drink. Fungome is an obsolete term for mushroom or fungus. Fungopark must then be any park where mushrooms grow, but in this case it is specifically Phoenix Park. There was no systematic survey of flowering plants, or the cryptogamic ones, of Phoenix Park until 1988, though the early Dublin botanists Caleb Threkold, John Ruddy, and Walter Wade were the first to publish findings that included some of the Phoenix Park flora. Joyce implicitly recognized this lack of attention to the park by Irish botany. It alludes to stranger flora yet, namely Amanita, carefully subverting the commonly known characteristics of Amanita: warts, slimy patches, and wrinkles. He then adds ritual elements: supplication at the shrine of Mount Mushroom, and the imperative drink, adumbrating the shamanic rise of Amanita muscaria in Siberian cultures, where the urine of a person under mushroom intoxication is recycled by the acolyte to perpetuate its intoxicating effects. This is later recapitulated in Mount of Mish and Sacred Sponge. Did Joyce know Amanita muscaria conclusively? It seems he did, for in the Musirum episode he brings forth a Tom, Dick, and Harry trio, one of whom he calls Tishul Fitz Tuamush, disguising the French word for fly agaric, Tuamouche, pronounced Tumouche, I guess. In annotations to Finnegan's Wake, Roland McHugh gave this phrase a military/sexual gloss instead of the mycological one suggested here. However, Tumouche, too much, mushrooms in general, and Amanita muscaria in particular, are all indicated. Tumouche also pretends toadstool, in an orthographical interlinkage that intensifies the interpretation as a mycological realization. In Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality in 1968, Art Gordon Wasson set forth his celebrated theory that Amanita muscaria was the soma of the Argaveda. Over 30 years later, Peter Lamborn Wilson compared the Vedic and Irish literature to postulate that an Amanita muscaria cult may have existed in prehistoric Ireland. Notwithstanding that Finnegan's Wake appeared in print 3 decades prior to Wasson's Soma and 7 prior to Wilson's Plowing the Clouds, The Search for Irish Soma, it seems that the most tantalizing evidence for Irish Soma may in fact lurk in Finnegan's Wake. Did Joyce have an intimation of the ethnomycology of Wasson in the Fungo Park passage? Of course, this is preposterous. Or is it? The uncanny possibilities become curiouser and curiouser as we press forward, for in Book 2, in Megafundum of his Tomashunders, we relish another direct hit on a favorite Wasson hypothesis: the association of mushrooms and thunder. An anagram for Soma Thunders, Tomashunders, elevates the mycological to an archetypical theme. Thunder is the cryptogamic embodiment of technological change that reverberates in the 10 thunder words of the Wake. If wayward speculation about Amanita muscaria in the Wake nettles the abecedarian reader, one can easily cling to a shred of stability by way of Amanita phalloides, the infamous death cap. At 198.32, Joyce takes us to Giant's Holes and Grafton's Causeway and death-cap mushrooms round Fungus Grave, referring to unique formations of basaltic columns. Giant's Causeway and Fingal's Cave in Northern Ireland in the Inner Hebrides, respectively. Fungus Grave, conflating Funglas and Fingal, refers to Fingal's Cave, a huge sea cave on the uninhabited island of Staffa, near Mull in Iona. Discovered by Sir Joseph Banks in 1772 and visited by Felix Mendelssohn in 1829, the cave is 250 feet deep, 70 feet high, and was formed by basaltic rock cooled to form hexagonal columns. Myxomycetologist Roland McHugh glosses Funglas as Finglas, a district of Dublin, near the Glasnevin Botanic Garden in Phoenix Park, and the word round suggests mushrooms growing in a fairy ring. intensifying the imagery of poisonous mushrooms growing in a circle around a grave. It is doubtful that Amanita phalloides actually grows on Staffa, but Joyce's deathcap mushrooms here form a metamorphic shift of the fungal toward the geological, an approximation of Hylozoic belief, and a drift towards a cosmic vision where the most toxic mushroom known becomes our totemic ancestor. There are further hints at this deathcap and cup champagne. As we all know, toadstool is a common synonym for mushroom, usually having a negative connotation, although the familiar usage that mushrooms are edible and toadstools poisonous has no scientific validity whatsoever. When Joyce sets a toadstool on the verge of self-abyss, he validates the observation that mushrooms grow on wood. Constructive fragmentation of toadstool produces two wood plus stool. A handy gloss might be toadstool, growing on wood. The deeper meaning, however, derives from William Blake, taking into account the association of the toadstool with the abyss. Blake, in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, depicts a fungus as an emblem of the material world. I remained sitting in the twisted root of an oak. He, an angel, was suspended in a fungus which hung with the dead downward into the deep. By degrees, we beheld the infinite abyss. For Blake, fungus manifests the materialism in which the spiritual world is mired, an early intimation of the Romantic era of the attempt to gain philosophical perspective of the perplexing flux of organic life, to begin to fathom its meaning in human terms, apart from the developing regime of scientific knowledge and the trend toward evolutionary thought. Joyce himself, in a portrait of the artist as a young man, had used the metaphor of fungus to depict the quintessential horrors of hell. Obedient as we are today to the paradigm of science, these usages will seem either quaint or metaphysical, but the literary tendency toward philosophical speculation runs in far different channels than the everyday empiricism of differentiating one species from another. Yet, one almost wishes to burst the bubble of Joyce's and Blake's mycological metaphysics by seeking to know just what species of fungus was suspended over that dark abyss. Did Blake's vision originate in a passing glance at Grifola frondosa at the base of an oak in Lambeth? The inclination towards specificity is a tempting, and always positive, direction to take, but ultimately unsatisfying to the mental traveler seeking to broaden literary perspectives on mycology. We may as well wonder why British mushroom guides characterize Grifola frondosa as smelling of mice and cold mashed potatoes. Subjective perceptions that tell us more about our hunger for knowledge than our taste for maitake. From the umwelt of the wake-squashed quotados, the recorso of pan-etymological meanderings through the precocious formation of meaning is oceanic and fluid, recycling through mind and history, recycling through the words themselves. Finnegan's Wake is not a disquisition on mycology, but a mycelial mat in which fruiting bodies are knotted deep in the sclero- the sclerotia of words. Joyce's ultimate vision of the fungal world appears in a portmanteau construct of wider botanical significance. Fungo alligaceous mucifalescule Graminopalmular plantain. The passage in which this tidy botanical compendium appears deserves placing in its larger context. A spathe of Calyptrus gloom involucrumines the Perinathean amenta, Fungo gaussius muscifilicio Graminopalmular plantain, of increasing Livivorous feelful thinkalinks, luxuriating every whensoever among skull hollows and carnal cysts of a weed waste wood wolvult, the compression of several divisions of cryptogamous fungi, algae, mosses and ferns, and vascular grasses and palms, plants, introduces a veritable planteon of botanical life. McHugh has noted the calyptra refers to the hood of the spore case in non-flowering plants, though this meaning does not apply to the fungi. In Joyce's Book of the Dark, John Bishop provides an incisive analysis of this passage as a compressed history of the evolution of botanical life. Joyce's Weed Waste Wide Wevelled delineates a literal environment in which toadstools are weeds that mimic and reflect the gestalt of popular mycology. In the Wake's closing pages, Earwicker himself, normally in the guise of an earwig, Forficula auricularia, makes a sudden appearance as a mushroom. Why, them's the mushrooms. Much up during the night. Notice that the 90-degree counterclockwise rotation of M in much gives us an anagram of HCE, recapitulated in muchrooms. Mushrooms, in the Wake, scarcely noticed, crop up time again. Paddish pretties, pills and pie, mushroom sniffer, and even characters such as Mildewlease and the Mikes, and the Grib, harbor mycological readings in which the rhizosphere surfaces in consciousness through the cipher of Joyce's immense poem. As Marshall McLuhan pointed out, Joyce solved numerous problems which science had not yet formulated as problems. Finnegan's Wake ends with the word the, forever bringing us back to the beginning again. River run past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. The Wake has attracted its share of excellent readers. Among them are John Lennon, Joseph Mitchell, and Sam Savage. In Up in the Old Hotel, Mitchell claimed, "I am an obsessed reader of Finnegan's Wake. I must have read it at least half a dozen times. And every time I read the Anna Livia Pluribel section, I hear the voices of my mother and my aunts as they walk among the graves in old Iona Cemetery, and it is getting dark." In Savage's tale Furman, the eponymous hero is an intellectual mouse born in a bookstore on a litter fashioned by his mother on the torn up pages from Finnegan's Wake. And even mycologists have playfully bantered with the Wake's potential for appreciating the multifarious panoply of the fungi. Every evening at lightning up o'clock, sharp and until further notice in the mushroom marsh and the mushroom warms and in the way past down river run, past Eve and Adams, past marsh beacons and inky caps, along the dead man's fingers trail of luminescent filaments of love and desire. Joyce's compatriot Arthur Power once asked him if he ever thought of the afterlife. Joyce commented dryly, "I don't think much of this one." Lest one think that's a jaded remark, casually tossed off by an egotistical writer, and it is. Also remember that Joyce suffered from iritis and other ocular diseases that left him in a condition of near blindness for much of his adult life. His self-imposed exile from Ireland and peripatetic lifestyle did little to mitigate the sense of hostility and neglect his books engendered, and his odd familial relationships and troubled daughter brought him only acute personal grief. In exile, Joyce died in Zurich in 1941 and was buried there in Fluntern Cemetery. He considered literature a perpetual affirmation of the human spirit. And if you agree with John Cage, then Finnegan's Wake is without question the greatest work of literature of the century just past. Like the journals of Henry David Thoreau, like Cage's compositions themselves, Finnegan's Wake is a lively and rewarding place to meditate on the mystery of mushrooms. In 1922, Joyce had occasion to meet Marcel Proust, whose In Search of the Lost Time remains to this day another lofty pinnacle of literary modernism. Here were the two living geniuses of literature meeting in Paris for the first and only time. There are differing accounts of the meeting, but most agree that the two scarcely spoke to one another. One thing was mentioned. Proust asked Joyce if he liked truffles. Joyce replied, "Yes, I do." Arthur Power complained. Here are the two greatest literary figures of our time meeting, and they ask each other if they like truffles. So what else would they need to talk about?